This video is sponsored by Backbone, more on them later. Oh boy, has 2023 been a stellar year for video games. This is hardly a hot take, since the general consensus among most of the population is that the lineup this year is rammed full of games so good that we'll be talking about them for years. It's a little early for me to be talking about the best games of the year, since that's more of a late December thing, but given that it's awards season and Jeff Keighley's special industry evening will be, by the time you watch this, only a couple of days away, I think we all know what needs ranking. I briefly considered ranking every game nominated for a prize at the Game Awards, but I got to about 50 games and decided against it for some reason. So it's just for 6 games for today, and they're all up for the main award, but given how amazing they all are, hopefully you'll permit me a bit more time to talk in more depth about why they're so good. And if we're a little short on time, then we might need something where we can play console quality games on mobile devices, which is why I'm so happy that this video is sponsored by Backbone. Gaming on mobile phones has come along an awful lot recently, and Backbone are looking to push it even further with their controller that seamlessly attaches to your smartphone and effortlessly converts it into a next-gen games console. With it attached, you can play a wide variety of games ranging from App Store titles like Call of Duty Mobile to console and PC games by using Remote Play. There's also the Backbone app that keeps everything nicely organised in one place, and it's the best way to connect with friends and discover new games to play with your new Backbone. It doesn't matter if you're new to video games or an experienced pro, Backbone has the controller for you, which of course makes it a wonderful Christmas present. So if you want one of these for yourself or someone you know this holiday season, you can go to playbackbone.com or use the link in the description, or even scan this handy dandy QR code and it will take you exactly where you need to go. Thank you to Backbone for sponsoring this video. Anyway, let's rank some sweet-ass video games. But first we must sadly start with the least awesome, and yet the worst game of an incredible bunch would still improve your day substantially if you poured some time into it, and the Resident Evil 4 remake is in the slightly unfortunate position of having come out in one of the best years for video games in some time. To be fair, it was one of the safest bets of 2023, not an automatic win by any means since Capcom didn't do too amazingly with Resident Evil 3, but they've had a few goes at Resi 4 in the past, so a full-on remake was not only inevitable, but also very likely to be quite amazing. Like the other Resi remakes, it's very committed to being a remake instead of just a graphical reimagining, and this means that there are large parts of Resi 4 that are fundamentally different to what you may remember. Does that justify it being the worst, best game of the year? Nah, not really, but it does scale back the amount of excitement you can have for it. Every nominee for the main award this year is a continuation of an existing IP, but I feel it the most with Resi 4, which, yes, is a wonderful achievement that wrenches a game that has aged pretty well into current year, but I just can't get as excited for it as I did with the other games that came out in 2023. Don't get me wrong, it's Resident Evil 4 for fuck's sake. This is one of the tentpole titles of the last 25 years, and there's entire franchises that owe their existence to what this game laid out. And sure enough, a modern remake of that still feels pretty damn special to play. The improvements to the presentation are obvious, and Ashley is now bearable to be around, and the story kind of sort of makes sense now. Lovable fan favourite characters are chewing more scenery, and the genuine scares still hit very hard when the time arises. Do I wish that Capcom were aware of the original's faults enough to recognise that Resi 4 never gets as engaging as the scene in the village and do something about that for the remake? Yeah, but what we got was still pretty dope. Now Resi 5, that'll make for an interesting project. It wasn't that long ago that superhero games were struggling to find any kind of traction to complement the onrushing torrent of wildly successful movies. So it's kind of appropriate that at roughly the same time as the movies started to lose steam, the superhero games have roared into a new golden age, and after Insomniac Games wowed the world with their version of Spider-Man, they've barely looked back since. I platinumed Spider-Man 1, and you better believe I'm working my way towards doing the same with Spider-Man 2. This is a seriously impressive sequel that makes good use of the improvements made during the Miles Morales spin-off, and I think the best praise I can give this game is that despite having an initially less exciting premise than setting up the Sinister Six, you never feel like Spider-Man 2 is letting you down with its ideas. There's twice as many Spider-Men and some very entertaining villains to take down, so you're never short of things to do, but I think it's extra special to think about how this game uses the symbiote to drive a wedge between Peter and Miles, which provides a great backdrop for a large chunk of this game. It gives Spider-Man 2 a much darker tone than the first, and it helps to set itself apart as something much more interesting than just another Spider-Man game. Not that that would have been a bad thing, since it's now even more entertaining to swing through New York, and now it's a PS5 exclusive. The wizardry behind some ultra-fast travel never gets old, and actually, I'm a little concerned about playing a different open-world game and having to wait through loading screens. Ultimately, it's second last in this video because while it's wonderful, I don't think it will go down in history as one of the best games of all time. And sadly, that's the company it's keeping this year. I am enjoying the world we are living in right now, where not only can we have a single-player survival horror game being nominated for Game of the Year, we can have two of the fuckers! Yeah, it's a big year for horror fans, and an even bigger one for fans of the original Alan Wake, because Remedy Entertainment, fresh from turning heads with Control, decided to throw their hat in the ring for the year as one of the strongest representatives of the weird artsy horror game club. Alan Wake 2 was touted for a little while, and so its existence isn't much of a surprise, and yet actually having the chance to play a sequel to a game that came out 13 years ago and has spent most of that time being a cult classic, yeah, that's a fairly wild outcome, if I'm being honest. It's actually wonderful to have a game like this released not only to fairly widespread critical acclaim, but at a time when single-player games are either sanitized or shelved in favor of developing big money-spinning multiplayer experiences polluted with season passes. Alan Wake 2 is so uncompromising with its vision of how Remedy wanted to handle this game that it never holds back with the tense atmospheres or the scares or really the overall level of challenge. It's a brilliantly lit game, which may sound like a strange point of praise, but the colours are strong and either pop out when they need to or form deep shadows during darker sections, so that Alan Wake 2's unique blend of art styles can complement whatever tone it's going for at any one moment. The tone is usually kind of insane due to the many layers of meta-commentary and fantastic levels of self-awareness, and the end result is a wonderfully engaging experience that can't help but feel like the kind of game that Remedy have been wanting to make for a long time. You know when you play a game where you can tell that everyone on the dev team is pulling in the same direction? It's like that, but it's a trippy, sometimes confusing horror game. Fuck yeah, we need more of those. From 2006 to 2019, Nintendo did everything in their power to rob the word new of its meaning. The new Super Mario Bros. Games were generally fun to play and had some nifty ideas in them, but especially by the time the new Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe came out, calling them new feels less like an accurate description and more like the continuation of relatively strong brand recognition. I wouldn't go so far as to call them stale, but it felt like 2D Mario games were going through the motions, just buying time until the next big innovation comes along and gets me excited to play a 2D Mario game again. The easy line for reviews across the world is that Super Mario Bros. Brought the sense of amazement and, yeah, wonder back to a corner of the gaming world that has been running on autopilot for ages now. And there comes a point when playing Mario Bros. Wonder that I can only describe as breathing clearly when you've had a blocked nose for a while. Is this what Nintendo could have been doing all this time? The reality is that Nintendo are really good at making 2D Mario games. Super Mario Maker went quite far towards showing all the tools that could possibly make up one of these levels, and having played through countless user-created levels and everything that the 5 new games had to offer, I was under the impression that I'd seen everything that could be done with 2D Mario games. However, Super Mario Bros. Wonder practically forced its own hand with its fresh approach to platforming that explodes like a creativity firework whenever you find the Wonder Flower in each level, which transforms what are pretty cool levels into one extremely memorable moment after another, and it helps to elevate individual levels beyond just, ooh, this is the water level. The tropes and archetypes are there for sure, but they're used as mere settings for creative levels instead of trying to do the heavy lifting on their own. I need Nintendo to make more of these and then give us Mario Wonder Maker when they're done. That's 15 years worth of games right there. Once again, this isn't a list of my favourite games of 2023, but the top 2 will likely be subject to change right up until I make that video. It'll be fascinating to see which game is voted as Game of the Year, because for me it's a straight fight between Baldur's Gate 3 and Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I actually don't mind at all who wins, because these two games have been comfortable standouts, and hell, I will talk about my picks for Game of the Year before the year is out, so this may still be subject to change, but for now, we've got Baldur's Gate 3 in second. It's one of the strongest seconds that I could ever ask for though, and it's kind of ridiculous to see this game fully released after it had been in early access for the best part of 3 years. I've criticized games that like to exist as an early build for years at a time, but I'm glad there's a game out there that not only proves me wrong, but is so good that I kinda hope that more games do this if necessary. To be fair, the main release of Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't feel much like the early draft work and is actually only a distant relative to previous Baldur's Gate titles due to the employment of Larian Studios to bash this thing into shape. So gone are a lot of things that would tie this game to Baldur's Gate 2, and in their place is a turn-based RPG that leans heavily on mechanics lifted from Dungeons and Dragons. And while I want to hate random dice rolls fucking me over, Baldur's Gate 3 is way too charming for anything like that to happen. It's absolutely astonishing to play in real time, and you do end up getting swept up by the sheer number of options you have to tackle your adventure with. The scope of Baldur's Gate 3 is so impossibly large that other developers have stepped in to say, we can't match this, sorry. And I feel like that kinda sets the mood for how utterly ridiculous this game is most of the time. The laughs I've had with Baldur's Gate 3 can't really be matched by anything else that's come out this year, and the critical failures do go some way towards softening the blow of completely whiffing your objective. You can pour dozens if not hundreds of hours into this and not even scratch the surface. Baldur's Gate 3 is an incredibly strong video game that can bear the weight of an entire industry on its shoulders with ease, but I'm sorry, Tears of the Kingdom is a whole different matter entirely. My expectations going into each of these games was wildly different, and Tears of the Kingdom had the best part of 4 years worth of speculation and theories behind it, and when you go so long without hearing anything about it, you do start to wonder how it could possibly match up to the hype you've built in your head. And then you finally do play it, and just everything falls into place. I don't think I've ever played a sequel to one of the best games ever made that has made the first game look like a tech demo. Breath of the Wild was perfect at making its game world feel like one big playground, and somehow, Nintendo managed to surpass this feeling in Tears of the Kingdom. The new abilities mesh with the existing overworld seamlessly and transform how you interact with basic objects and solve problems with them. Not every issue left over from Breath of the Wild has been solved, and there's definitely a distinct mirroring of design philosophy, but even the sticky stuff that has been carried over has been altered to be considerably more palatable. Like, Nintendo could easily have removed weapon durability altogether, but the creative goblins in the brains of the developers decided to let the player glue random shit together and make weapons out of thin air. Nintendo could have made the story more immediate and not just be told in flashbacks, but instead, they told the story from a different perspective with some truly astonishing characterization for Zelda, the likes of which we may never see again. Ganondorf is back, and he's awesome and swole and the villain that this game needs, and it's exactly what the sequel to Breath of the Wild needed to be. Baldur's Gate 3 made me feel very happy, but Tears of the Kingdom made me feel like a child again, and there was only one outcome of that. There's no going back from here, is there? And yeah, those are my rankings of the Game of the Year nominees. Do you agree, or is there something else you'd have at number 1? Let me know in a comment down below, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe for more, and hit that bell for notifications of every new upload. Last week I talked about games that don't have any checkpoints, so go check that out. And I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including the Green Scorpion, Scott Riker, and Sarah Malion. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.